Hola, bienvenidas a todos y todas y todes a esta nueva masterclass de el mes del diseño sobre diseño y arte. Como bien saben, el mes del diseño es una iniciativa organizada por el área de diseño del Ministerio de las Culturas, las Artes y el Patrimonio del Gobierno de Chile. Se realiza anualmente desde el año 2011 y este 2021 estamos de aniversario cumpliendo 10 años, el cual coincide con los 10 años de la creación del área de diseño. El mes se trata de una agenda colaborativa de eventos culturales y educacionales en donde la academia, los gremios, organizaciones, oficinas, diseñadores y creadores se encuentran para abordar las problemáticas e innovaciones del diseño en Chile, con el objetivo de promover y posicionar el rol de esta disciplina y práctica en la ciudadanía y que se comprenda su valor como agente clave en las economías creativas y en la preservación del patrimonio, la memoria y la identidad de las sociedades. En esta 10ª versión, el mes del diseño se presenta bajo el concepto de diseño en tránsito, a través de un completo programa en torno a las rutas de transformación que está experimentando el diseño como cultura práctica y una disciplina en sus diversas manifestaciones. Es una invitación a pensar y discutir sobre las formas y el valor de diseñar lo que viene a través de reflexiones sobre el problema o los problemas que se enfrenta el diseño, los cambios en la práctica y la manera de enseñar y cuáles son las nuevas rutas y fronteras de este sector. Este evento, esta masterclass, es parte de la serie de ideas y conversaciones de los tránsitos del diseño con un foco en el futuro y la pregunta de cómo vamos a diseñar estos eventuales futuros. Algunos autores han hablado de que el arte es aquello que prepara y abre la mente para el próximo golpe tecnológico que nos tocará vivir, o que nos está tocando vivir. Ese poder de especulación y anticipación es usado por el diseño a la hora de abordar o de trazar caminos que nos permitan nuevas formas de vivir. Este panel tiene como objetivo discutir esta y otras relaciones entre el arte y el diseño en el contexto de la pregunta de hacia dónde está transitando nuestra disciplina y cuáles son los futuros posibles en relación a esta combinación. Quisiera presentar a nuestra invitada Alice Black. Ella es gestora cultural y experta en economía creativa británica, parte del directorio de la British Library y exdirectora del Design Museum de Londres por más de 12 años, y una gran responsable de su transformación y crecimiento, y a quien tuvimos en Chile, me parece bien, el año 2017, si no lo recuerdo. Y está con nosotros la doctora Helga Schmidt, es diseñadora, artista, investigadora y educadora, nombrada una de las personas más influyentes en tecnología AR/VR de Londres en el 2019 y trabaja abriendo la temporalidad, tiempo vivido, a través de la intersección del diseño, la sociología y la cronobiología. Actualmente es residente de la Somerset House en Reino Unido. Y este panel será moderado por una gran conocida de nuestra casa, y tanto del área de diseño como del ministerio, y es Constanza Well, quien es directora fundadora de la Fundación Antena. Es licenciada en Estética de la Universidad Católica, con estudios en Historia del Arte, Filosofía, Gestión de las Artes y la Cultura. Sus prácticas profesionales giran en torno a la gestión cultural, el campo editorial y la curatoría de proyectos artísticos. Así que quisiera pedirle a Constanza, a nuestras invitadas, Helga y Alice, que prendan sus cámaras para poder iniciar este panel, y masterclass de nuestras dos grandes profesionales. Así que muchas gracias por estar acá, les agradezco a ustedes y quienes están con nosotros, y los dejo con Constanza para la introducción de nuestra sesión. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a ti, Trinidad, muchas gracias a todo el equipo que ha estado desarrollando este mes del diseño. Un gusto de saludarles a todos quienes están en la audiencia. Un gusto saludarlas a ustedes, Alice y Helga. Realmente es un honor contar con ustedes esta mañana acá en Chile. Y justamente para conversar sobre los tránsitos del diseño y todo lo que nos introducía Trinidad, es que es muy relevante cuando dos mujeres que están en otras latitudes nos entregan su visión, sus perspectivas y otras maneras de mirar, quizás algo que nos une a todos, pero que siempre es interesante, ¿no es cierto?, la diversidad. Entonces, dicho eso, y para poder entrar a lo que interesa, que es escucharlas a ustedes, tengo la misión de leerles a cada una un poquito más de biografía para que quienes nos van a estar escuchando entren un poco más en sus mundos, en sus universos de trabajo, en sus prácticas. Entonces, les quiero contar que Alice Black en enero del 2021 creó Art Ultra, que es una plataforma dedicada a apoyar a los artistas que se inician en sus carreras, al brindar acceso a proyectos, oportunidades de subvenciones, exposiciones, residencias, espacios de estudios, así como orientación empresarial. Art Ultra se compromete a perfilar artistas emergentes y crear un mundo del arte más diverso y vibrante. Art Ultra fue nombrada recientemente finalista en el Creative Cities Challenge, lanzado por el alcalde de Londres, Mairie de París, Berlin Partner y New York City Economic Development Corporation. Alice también asesora a empresas culturales y produce eventos culturales a gran escala. Y del 2007 al 2020, Alice fue subdirectora y luego directora del Design Museum de Londres, como nos contaba Trinidad. El encargo de Alice fue desarrollar audiencias, aumentar ingresos generados por ellos mismos y supervisar operaciones de este museo que creciera para la inclusión, recaudación de fondos, exposiciones y programas de aprendizaje. En el 2008 al 2016, Alice también dirigió el proyecto de 82 millones de libras esterlinas para transformar el antiguo Commonwealth Institute, un edificio protegido de la posguerra en Kensington, en el nuevo hogar del Design Museum. Tremendo desafío. Y crear el principal museo de diseño y arquitectura contemporáneo del Reino Unido, triplicando su tamaño y público. En mayo del 2018, el Museo del Diseño ganó un prestigioso premio nombrado Museo Europeo del Año, en reconocimiento a su impacto social, enfoque internacional e intercultural de múltiples capas. Alice se graduó de ec en el Business School en Francia, comenzó su carrera en la banca en Nueva York y comenzó su carrera cultural en roles estratégicos y operativos en el Imperial War Museum. Las funciones no ejecutivas de Alice incluyen también la junta de proyectos del nuevo Museo de Londres y el comité asesor de la Biblioteca Británica. Alice también es embajadora cultural en la Junta de Liderazgo Cultural del Alcalde de Londres. Así que una tremenda trayectoria, Alice. Realmente conversar contigo hoy día va a ser muy, muy provocativo, y de hecho quiero comentarles que cualquier comentario o pregunta que quieran ir poniendo en el camino, por favor vayan poniéndolas en el chat para que luego cuando tengamos el Q&A lo puedan hacer. Y ahora procedo a contarles que nuestra otra invitada, Helga Schmidt, es doctora. Helga Schmidt en realidad es artista, diseñadora, investigadora y educadora. Helga es residente en Somerset House y directora del curso del BA en Diseño Gráfico y Medios en el London College of Communication. En su obra abre un nuevo mundo de temporalidad, tema del cual vamos a estar conversando, situado en la intersección del diseño, la sociología y la cronobiología. Como fundadora de una práctica y plataforma de investigación artística, ella explora la naturaleza multifacética del tiempo en un contexto académico y cultural. En 2020 publicó el libro Ucronia, Designing Time. Helga fue nombrada como una de las personas más influyentes de Londres en el 2019 en tecnología ARBR, y en 2018 fue diseñadora residente en el Design Museum de Londres. Trabajó como investigadora en el Departamento de Arquitectura y Diseño del Museo de Arte Moderno de Nueva York, como tutora en el Royal College of Art, E internacionalmente como diseñadora y artista en proyectos de alto perfil en el Victoria and Albert Museum, la Real Academia de Arte y otros lugares. Su trabajo ha sido exhibido y presentado en muchos lugares del mundo, incluyendo la Serpentine Gallery, el Design Museum de Londres nuevamente, la Dia Art Foundation en Nueva York, la Bienal de Diseño de Estambul y en DMY Berlín. Ha recibido muchos premios, incluidos como el Type Directors Award, el Art Directors Award, el Best German Books Award, así como una beca Fulbright y 2 becas GAAD. Así que bueno, la verdad es que como pueden ver, estamos con 2 tremendas invitadas nuevamente y es un gusto para mí entonces darte la palabra, Alice Black, para que tengas tus 20 minutos de presentación.
Muchas gracias, Constanza. Me encanta mucho estar aquí. I wish I could do the conversation and all the presentation in Espanol, but sadly, I'm going to have to speak English. So I'm going to now share my screen and show you a presentation. There we are. Give me one moment so I can share it.
I'll let you know when you have the full screen on. It's
okay.
There you are. It's perfect.
I think excellent. Good.
Go ahead.
So for the next 20 minutes or so, I would like to address this very wide topic of design and art. Obviously, think about the commonalities and points of departures, but really, I want to think about how both disciplines confront us with the challenges that we face as a society today and offer us means of engaging with these challenges. And then in that context, I want to focus more specifically on contemporary practice and on the landscape for emerging artists and designers at the critical stage of their development. So design and art, clearly 2 disciplines that share common tools and common vocabulary. And here you can see on the slides on the left-hand side, Carl Andre's Equivalent 8, an installation with bricks, those very bricks that form this house on the right-hand side, which is a house in Warsaw. And we can use, the in a simplistic way, define design as with a mantra of form following function. And we see here the house and using the bricks and defining the house and design as that process, and which creates new products and new services and interface. And using also that, we can think about art as the creation of work without function, without that ultimate purpose. But we could say that art makes us think and reveals the world around us. I'm reminded of the words of the French poet and philosopher Paul Valéry, who said, "A work of art should always teach us that we haven't seen what we are seeing." But with this common vocabulary and this common tools, I think we can move beyond that classic dichotomy of art and design. And here on the slides, we're looking at 2 interesting works. They are similar objects. They are flags. On the left-hand side, we can see the Refugee Nation flag, which was designed by Yara Said for the 2016 Olympic Games, to give refugees a flag and a banner under which to march for the 2016 Olympics. And on the right-hand side, we have Jeremy Deller's punch in the face. We are all immigrant scum, asking us to think about how we position ourselves vis-a-vis this big question of our time, you know, immigration, the refugees. This has been a massive issue for the world, and I was interested to look at these two ways of addressing the topic, because I think on the left-hand side, the designers has addressed this topic and gives us agency and says, here is how I can change the world to give these refugees a nation and a banner under which to march. What Jeremy is doing with his flag is sort of arresting us, and he's asking us to take position, to reflect on our own status when we look at the images of immigrants. So, you know, there is that common preoccupation, that common activism, and that common question that is asked of us, but perhaps different ways of implementing it. And in this slide, I'm looking at the work of an artist who is an artist and a designer. Her name is Sophie Thomas. And in the left-hand side, we see an installation which was at the Royal Academy in 2018. And basically this installation is made up of pieces of glass and rejected plastics that has been harvested in some of the most polluted beaches in our planet, as well as nets that have been discarded. Using a hand-blowing glass process, she integrates these elements within this somewhat horrific display that challenges us to think about what is happening in our seas today and makes it explicit, makes us look at it today. On the right-hand side, Sophie collaborated with another designer in this cleanup camo range of scarves and cushions. And there again, she harvested discarded plastics from Camilo Beach. And she uses this as the artistic and the implementation, the design on her objects, but also the way in which each of these objects are made is part of a circular economy. And they are produced in the most sustainable way possible. There are mono fabric, only one fabric is used for all the mono material, I should say, for the thread, for the zip, and all of these, the source material is Second Life. So this is another example where artists and designers are merging and are using their voices and their practice to demonstrate to us that we can have agency in the world. So moving on now, I want to think about nurturing the development and the practice of emerging artists and designers, because I feel that today, more than ever, we need to give that space to develop new ways of thinking, of recapturing the time of exploration. And it's never more important, I find, that for emerging artists and emerging designers. In fact, in my 12 years at the Design Museum, one of the program that was most important to me was Designers in Residence, where we gave 4 designers from around the world the opportunity to think about a project, and very much a developmental project, which would give them a free latitude to explore a topic, which would be quite important for them to develop their practice going forward. And this has informed the framework that I also applied in the work that I currently do with Art Ultra, which is supporting emerging artists find their voice and develop their practice. And I think this element of time, of figuring out what their key message is quite critical. But today, with resources so thin on the ground, it's true that it's a real challenge. So, you know, the framework and what is critical to support, I feel, emerging artists as emerging architects, emerging designers, as they develop their practices, is those 7 elements. You know, the financial support, you know, where is money, where can I use bursaries or residency to support myself during that time of exploration? Where are the studios? How can I benefit from the support of a network, from mentoring and continuing professional development? Many artists and designers that I've spoken to have all told me, you go through your education, you develop your practice, but then there's a bit of a cliff edge. And then you're on your own, having to develop your own practice. And there's not a whole lot to support you in those very critical stages. And so this is the thing that I've tried to do with Art Ultra, to develop this framework of support for artists. But I want to go back just for a minute to designers in residence, as it's, you know, very relevant to the conversation that we're having today. And a lot of those residencies that we enabled at the Design Museum had outcomes that were very much at the cross-section of art and design. So, for example, here on screen, you see Hye-yeon Park and her disobedient clock, which started to misbehave once you took your eyes off it. And this was her reflection on time and how we relate to all those instruments who give time and what our relationship to them are. On the right-hand side, there's a project from Ella Bully, who was a designer in residence in 2018. And her project was about, what do we take from our home when we become expatriates, when we come back to our original home? And she developed these tiles that are almost as artistic as design objects that capture something of a history and a personal journey. And here was the residency studio at the Design Museum and some of our designers in residence from 2017. And I think what was really important for them, and I'm particularly reminded of this when I'm seeing Chris Hildry here on the picture, was developing a project that then had carried them through for many years in their practice. So while at the Design Museum, Chris developed a proxy address concept and idea that he's rolling out today, which is give addresses to homeless people as a way to enable them to get a foot back into our society, because without an address, you are completely outside of the functioning society. And I'm very delighted that the next speaker after me will be Dr. Helga Schmidt, who was also a designer in residence. And I hope she will share with us some of the amazing exploration that she made during her time at the museum and beyond. And the translation of these ideas of development and of nurturing a voice and nurturing time to develop a practice, I put them in practice again earlier this year when I organized with Art Ultra a residency for 2 emerging artists. This residency came about because during COVID, hotels were shut, and a hotel approached me and said, look, we have a room full a hotel full of bedrooms and no one in there. So we'd like to turn them over to artists. And so what we did was convert 2 of these rooms into artist studios. After which, for 5 weeks, these 2 artists, Emmanuel Unagi and Mathilde Marley, were able to create and develop their project. And then they were given an exhibition in the hotel and a networking event, which enabled them to meet their audience. And I have here an image of their studio. The studio was a lot less tidy, I would say, than the designer's studio at the Design Museum. And a final point, really, across both these projects, what I found really very powerful was the putting together of designers, a group of designers, a group of artists, and enabling that peer-to-peer conversation. Because a journey, a trajectory, a development is never better than when it's shared with someone, and certainly shared with a peer. So here in this last image, you can see that there is an image of one of the artists on the right-hand side by Emmanuel Unagi. And on the left-hand side, you see Mathilde Merli, the other artist, who's hijacked the practice and the image of Emmanuel to turn it into another image, which she's made her own. And I think that enriching of practices peer-to-peer is also a really, really important element in terms of nurturing that development of emerging artists and designers. So I think this is the end of my talk, and I will stop sharing and hand back to Constanza for the next speaker.
Thank you very, very much, Alice. We will be commenting after we finish with both presentations, because there is a lot to share. So Helga, now you have the microphone and the screen.
Thank you
Go
so
ahead.
much. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I will build up a bit on what Alice was saying. So the design residency at the Design Museum was really one of the key moments for me to develop my work. So just, can you see my screen? Just to check.
Not yet. So
Not yet.
We can have.
Okay.
We can have a minute for you to solve it, so it's okay. Now we can see it, and maybe you want to. There you go. Perfect.
Super. Okay, so I will take the time. So I will dive into a very specific topic, the topic of time. So as an example of like probably the future of design and how we as designers can influence and think about alternative ways. I'll start with a little video clip. I hope it plays well through with the Wi-Fi. Okay, so I just threw a bunch of buzzwords on you in terms of the relationship with time. For me, it was very interesting in terms of the pandemic, because, you know, there was this feeling of not having enough time, all the time pressure all the time. And I think the pandemic, we were almost forced to rethink our relationship to time. So our full schedules, in a way, just were all frozen. And it was almost one big Ukrainian experiment, and I'll go into what I mean with this. So, and now we're in this, you know, stage of slowly coming back, and I'm wondering, are we coming back to the same speed? And is the time pressure already hitting again, or have we actually changed our relationship of times through this experience we made, and the feeling of like, maybe I don't need to do that much, but just give, you know, have more time for, you know, relaxing, reading a book, or walking in the park. So it's quite interesting. So in which age we think we are. So before, in a way, we said we're in this Cronian age where we're really rushing through and everything needs to be faster and faster. And all my work is around this idea of, how can we gain temporal serenity and kind of freedom, and don't feel so stressed and have a different kind of relationship with time. And this is where the idea of Uchronia comes from. So I'll talk you a little bit through what the word means. So Uchronia, so everyone is probably familiar with the idea of utopia. Utopos, no place. And Uchronia is, in a way, what's utopia for the place? It means Uchronos, no time. And there's 3 different ways how we can reach a Uchronia, really good relationship with time, that have been defined by the sociologist Helga Novotny. And so the one is the cocaine full of time. That means we have all the time in the world. There's a German fairy tale where you have to eat your way through a mountain of mashed potatoes. After you've done that, you reach the land of plenty, you lay out your bag, and the fried chickens or tofu chickens, tofurkeys, fly into your mouth. So the idea, you've just all the time and all the money in the world. So maybe some of you are right there. That's pretty good. Then there's a second way. The second way would be rather talking about temporal flexibilization and self-determination. It's something I think it's quite true for how we live now and what happened through the pandemic. We don't want to go into the office every single day. We have learned that working at home gives us so much more flexibility. Maybe some of you have started to sleep longer, or taking naps, or going for walks, and so on. So really changing up their own rhythm. And we probably understood the value of being in charge of your own time. So that's probably the direction that has been really pushed by the pandemic, and really almost systematic change. And one extreme example is by the artist Fiete Stolte, who divided his day into 8 days. So instead of 24 hours, one day had 28 hours. And he was just saying, it's not so important that I synchronize always where I live in London, but at some point of the week, I synchronize with a place in, I synchronize with New York, and then I synchronize with Auckland and so on. And now in this kind of age where we all, having online meetings, we can really sympathize with this idea. But it's just taking it to the extreme if you have temporal freedom. And the third category relates to the vicissitudes of life. That means the more rhythmic idea. And with rhythmic idea, we can think of natural rhythms. We can think of the rhythm of a conversation, or probably even this session today, how it organically unfolds, and maybe we keep talking for the next 24 hours because we just don't want to stop. I don't know. So that's a bit like looking into certain rhythms. In this relationship, I'll give you a bit of idea. So you probably heard where I'm situated. My background is design and art, but I work together with chronobiologists and also sociologists. So on the one hand, looking into our time crisis, on the other hand, looking into our body rhythms. How do they actually work? And the discipline of chronobiology is quite young, but it was about like, how can we manipulate our body clock to, in a way, create a sleepless soldier, or those kind of ideas. And I think the chronobiologist Russell Foster asked in this context, so if we only need to sleep 2 hours, would this be this Uchronia time paradise? We would have so much time. Or would it be, on the other hand, another kind of time hell, because we are just kind of doubling what we're doing and the expectations are doubling. And so, in a way, that's the kind of social shaping of our behaviors. How would this relate? But it's quite interesting to think about. So now I want to introduce you to the idea of Uchronian thinking, and also what does it mean? And I want to spark this idea. And next time when you think about how you structure your day, think if you can break out of the system of hours, minutes, and seconds. So thinking about this idea of a Zeitgeber, we have 3 main time givers. So you have the natural rhythms, we have the societal rhythm, so the clock-based system here, and then we have our human body rhythm. And if we think about time givers instead of hours, minutes, and seconds, it's something you can envision yourself sitting on a swing set. And you're swinging, and this is your own body rhythm. And then you have external pushers that influence your rhythm. And then it depends on your strength. If you let the alarm clock disrupt you, or you're like, no, I just stay in bed and sleep as long as I want. External pushers, so extreme could be any one of your parents, then you know what extreme pusher, but it can of course be university or the job and so on. But I think just moving this idea away from I structure my day by hours, but I structure it by kind of pushers, something that influences me. And I think about the values. What do I really value and what is allowed to influence me and for how long and in what way? And so that's the kind of general idea behind my projects. And I'm running Uchronia workshops as part of my practice. So I'm creating or designing a time frame. And I asked my students, that was at the Royal College of Art, to kind of remove themselves from clock time. So any time-giving device was removed. And they were asked to develop their own time-giving device, whatever they wanted it to be. And so one example was one group, they wanted to read out loud In Search of Lost Time by Proust. And they were reading it out for over 48 hours. So always someone was reading. Someone was always knitting. So you could see the different colors was always meaning it was a different person that was knitting. And someone was allowed, had a kind of free time, could listen, could cook, and another person was sleeping. So they had this kind of rhythm that was really dictated pretty much by the book and the chapters of the book and the conversations around it. Just to kind of explore the idea how it is, you know, to form a time community and jump out of the system. So here's some images from that. And I speak about another one. I send one other group to a pink house, to a pink mansion. And this group, so pretty much all rooms were looking like in a very extreme way designed. And they wanted the house to be the time giver. It was this kind of pink mansion in Essex, or maybe a Playboy mansion, you can imagine. So there were a lot of bedrooms and a lot of bathrooms. And the students wandered by themselves through the place. And it was, they had like a polyphasic rhythm, you could say. So they were sleeping a bit, taking a shower, eating something, then sleeping again. And so very different temporal system that was just in a way defined by the rooms and the house itself. So here's some more images. So here's one of the students in the house. I think you can tell he was like with this kind of outfit. It made much more sense to wear something like this than before. What was always nice with these kind of experiments is that the students are, you know, diving into this world. I wake them up, so they really don't need any clock device at all. And it's quite nice that they experience a certain kind of freedom. It's not this pressure, and they don't need to check, and I don't need to check an email than anything. So I'm just diving in this new system. I probably experienced something like a much better concentration. And so it's also for different ways of working, quite an interesting experiment. And when I wake them up, the students, they never want their mobile phones back, which is quite interesting. So it's almost this is their return to this other world that's so structured and where you always have to be on time for something. So that's one. So I'm running a different set of these kind of experiments. And I'll introduce you to one other concept. It's called Circadian Space. And that's also related to your body rhythm. So circa and dia, so circadian comes from circa and dias, means around a day or around 24 hours. So what do I mean? So I'm just going through the circadian rhythm with you. So if you just imagine a normal day, like a typical day of one person. So the person goes to bed at midnight and then sleeps for 8 hours. You don't have to take this literal. Some of us need 5 hours, some 11, and some days are different. So every single day would be slightly different. But so here you are, this is the sleep phase. So everyone goes through all these phases, but just in different duration. So from the sleep phase, you come into the wake-up phase. Here, this is around an hour. It's a shorter phase. It's a kind of transition, and I would almost call it a sunrise moment, where you go from lying to standing. You're kind of unfolding until you're awake. After that phase, you come into a concentration phase, a cognitive performance phase. This is where, concentration, logical reasoning, short-term memory is best. Again, and this phase can be longer and shorter. Yeah. After this, you come into a second sleep phase, or also nap phase. So you could divide. So I think maybe for you, this is also more common to take a sort of siesta during the day. That is very close to the natural rhythm of the body. After this, you come into a next active phase. That's the physical performance phase. This is where muscle strength, grip strength is best. If you're a performer or work physically, you really feel that there's a difference. But I think it's also nice to think, if we think about our bodies, and probably I'm sitting here again, and I don't know if you're all sitting, but this could be a stage where we should all be moving around. And I think it's quite interesting, because I think, I'm in the UK, so I'm in this phase actually right now, and you are, depends on in your concentration phase, or maybe you're already moving into your nap phase. Depends on how the talk goes. Yeah, but this is the second active phase. But also just thinking, we are not just kind of brain-based people, we should also move. And after this, there's the intuitive stage, interesting for artists and designers, where creativity is best. So it's a transitional stage from the active mind to more kind of calm mind. And then you come into the sleepiness phase, the hormone melatonin sets in, and you kind of fall asleep. So this is the circadian rhythm. So I work with chronobiologists on these different phases, and I'm applying these kind of phases to my projects and installations. And I've picked two from the Design Museum, because I thought it's a very nice, as I'm here with the panel with Alice to show this work. And if we think of, let's say, how we move through spaces, it's often based on time. So maybe you had this, you wake up, the alarm rings, then you go from your bedroom to your bathroom. If you have to go to work, then you have to leave the house at a certain point of time, and then you have to arrive at the office at 10, and so on. So how you move through space is related to time. So the project idea is, how would it be if you actually, if your circadian rhythm defines how you move through spaces? So time becomes the space. So here you can think of a sort of experiment. So you would have 5 people sleeping taking part in this experiment. And as soon as they are tired, they go into the sleep phase, and they sleep as long as they want. And then you go clockwise. So when you wake up, you go into the little wake up phase, as long as you need, and then you take your time really on how you feel, and then you go into the concentration phase, and so on. So clockwise, you move through the space, and you daze just as long as you're back into the sleep phase again. And that might be 24 hours, maybe it's 19 hours or 30 hours, really depends on your day. And you see a bit the indications of the light. So light really influences light is the strongest time giver for our body. So you notice probably if you go outside, it really kind of activates you, or probably from your screen, you shouldn't look into your laptop right before you fall asleep because of the blue light. So it has to do with light spectrum and light intensity. So each room has a certain color. So the orange, for instance, triggers the hormone melatonin, makes you sleepy. And so this translated into some projects. So one idea is, of course, building this space. That's what I'm working on at the moment as a large scale experiment, and also for a performance piece. But I had already the chance to build one room so the project was called Circadian Dreams in the Design Museum. So here I had just one room. In a way, it was, you can see the kind of bedroom, and people, in a way, I compressed a day into 12 minutes. And I worked, so people were allowed to walk into the space, lay down on the bed, And then I worked with color and sound. So using these 7 phases, so you were laying down and then you could close your eyes or just kind of experience these different phases. I'll show, I don't think you can hear the sound, but here you at least, you can see how the colors changed. And it's quite nice of like, you know, in the physical performance phase, the light is very intense and very intense music that rather makes you moving. Just kind of thinking of, you know, how you feel and what's the atmosphere in every single one of these phases. So you see this intense red, which kind of activates you. Yeah. And then I give another short example based on that, based on the same concept. I was running an event, an atemporal event at the Design Museum called Designing Time. So again, taking the phases, using the light as the kind of time giver, and the schedule, we used these phases, and instead of, there was no clear schedule. So people, it's not that the speaker comes at 5:30, so how we have it today, and I have 1.5 minutes left, you know, so you need to kind of really be on time. I invited people in to just dive into the different phases. There were no breaks. It was like everyone could decide when they come in and when they come out. So you see from the layout, it was these sort of platforms, very soft toppers. So you could stay, you could stand, you can run around, you can lay down and sleep or sit as you want. So there is this kind of dynamic really for every body phase you're in. And then the programming of the event was really related to the different body phases. So in the physical performance phase, there was a performer activating the people to also move to stand up. And let's say in the cognitive performance phase, I had a chronobiologist and a sociologist talking about the kind of time crisis and our body and how this all works. And here we see an image from the intuitive phase of, you know, this kind of more conversation, this very open debating, exchanging ideas, in this creative phase we are in. And here in the sleepiness phase, so you see it's getting really dark. So you have a philosopher talking about all the ideas of time from that perspective. So it was really, can we think of when we schedule events, how would it be if they are scheduled by your circadian rhythm rather than by clock time? So to summarize, in all my work, I really try to break out of this kind of, you know, narrowness of this structure and think of, are there other forms we can communicate, we can synchronize, meet with each other, and think about time in a very different way. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Helga, and thank you so much, Alice, as well, both of you. It's been very nurturing taking the term of Alice in her project and process. Well, like to get into a deeper level in these layers of trying to reflect around how technology, as we were saying at the beginning, probably will be changing modification and blowing everything in a different way of how we live currently, no? And how can we think about possible futures from your practices and other practices and the crossings and entanglements of these, which is what you have been presenting today. And well, at least just to begin, because we have quite a while for the Q&A and while we wait for more precise questions from the audience. Well, there's a lot, but it's super interesting how you connect very precisely around the idea of time in terms of, Alice, you talk about nurturing art and design practices, no? And on the other hand, Helga, you were talking and explaining to us about uchronia and that it's kind of like the slowness of time or the no time, or, well, the circadian space, new words for me at least. So around that idea and these entanglements, we need time to nurture, no? And exactly that is what we are probably all looking into nowadays. And especially, well, you know, in Chile, we are in a very particular process. We are in the whole world collectively, but also locally in Chile. It's a very particular social political time as well, which needs a lot of nurturing, slowness, reflection, and observing as well. So these two talks are very, very well, you know, like designed for today. So the question is, how do you think that all the technological devices that we are surrounded with and that they are in a super fast development race are at the same time in favor of communication and convergence and development, but at the same time a pretty important obstacle and maybe even way of creating chaos in the nurturing and slowness, no, of our processes? What do you think, or how do you see that? Technology at the end of the day, how do you see
it? Okay, maybe you make a start. I think I looked a lot in part of sociology, and there's a lot of like, how do we use technology? How does it influence us? And there's this, Judy Wakeman speaks about the social shaping of technology. So often we speak about, you know, blame technology for things that they are speeding up. But on the other hand, it's us, we are deciding how often we look at our phone. No one tells us to look at it every 16 minutes or something. I don't know what's the average now. Technology is normally, so you looked into these different processes. You have this, Hartmut Rosa talks about this dimension that almost every new invention, technical invention, kind of time saving, never really saves time. So if we take, well, very simple, but before we had emails, we were writing letters. If we now would write the same amount of emails as we did letters, great, we would really save time. But what happened is instant communication. Through that, we are changing our behavior, and, you know, the expectations are changing. So and then the pace of life in a way is changing again, adjusting to, so you have to respond, and you're getting 100 emails a day. And then you find your full email box, and then you wish for another invention that probably, and that's pretty much true for all kind of time-saving technology. They're changing the standard and the way we are communicating rather than actually saving us time. That's why I was saying before, it's like if we only sleep 2 hours, do we actually have more time? Or again, our expectations are changing. So that's one side, and one brief other side is about synchronization processes. And this is where it's interesting if you use clock time, or how you at the moment use your phone. So maybe with friends, you're just texting of like, oh, let's meet tomorrow after lunch. I'll send you, and then you start to arrange things. And it's actually text back and forth, and not, we are meeting on Wednesday at 3 in this cafe. So it's quite interesting because technology could become a synchronization tool. But good.
And in that, no, it's fine, and it's excellent. Thank you. And in that sense, and to understand more about chronobiology, that as you said, it's a younger discipline. Do you look into that? And also, is that like, we are nowadays, we talk about our virtual self also. It's not only physical, emotional, or, you know, spiritual, but there's a new dimension in existence, which is this virtual, you know, character that is doing what you were just explaining. Does chronobiology look into that also?
The chronobiology looks really into body rhythms, in not just like human body, plants. A little sunflower has a rhythm, and every animal. And you know, your cat has a very different than you do, those kind of things. So it looks into these rhythms. But I think, what I find, I was talking about immersive art, and, you know, how we use VR and how we dive into virtual worlds. I think it's a lot about like the atmosphere we are creating, and let's say onboarding and offboarding moments, looking at senses. So even if you dive into this virtual world, the senses you take with you, the sound, you know, can build a bridge into this world. You're still there with your body. So it's still also worth to think about how, you know, what body posture you're taking in. So, you know, so you're not, it's still there. And I think I was saying as an example, it would be nice almost if you have tried a flotation tank. It's quite an interesting experience because the water is the same temperature as your body, and you kind of lose the borders of your body. And I think if we think in how we design this, and not just being focused on, I'm putting on a VR set and now I'm in a new world, but thinking about all these surroundings and how we are creating these worlds, and that we still exist as bodies with certain rhythms that will, you know, influence this. And of course, we know in VR, I don't know, 24 minutes is a good time to stay in, and then it becomes, you know, then it can easily become overwhelming. So I think it also has to do with understanding how we are overwhelmed by certain visual experience within certain technologies. So again, so that's why I always like to integrate the body a lot also with new technologies. Because you cannot just develop something and ignore how we will always, even if I jump into the experience of being a monkey, and I will still be a human experiencing being a monkey. Sorry, was this a good example?
No, that's very good, thank you. So, and Alice, what do you think, Alice, regarding what I was asking a few minutes ago?
Yes, I think, you know, we've obviously gone through, you know, a very traumatic period of time, and that period has really had a huge impact on how we experience time, on how our daily lives has unfolded. We, as Helga showed, we went from like this constant stimulation and constant, you know, regimentation of our diaries and our days by meetings and all the appointments that we have, and all of a sudden all of this seemed to get blown out, and there was a period where we've all experienced our time and our physicality completely differently. And I think we're only now sort of coming to term with that. And I think actually now is the very important moment for designers, for artists, to reflect back on this period, because I do believe that they both have a function, as I was saying in my talk, in just interpreting, making us see what is in front of our eyes all along, but giving it a different representation. And in the case of design, taking that and saying, here's what you can do about it. You know, let me design this new relationship that you can have with the world around you. And I personally see technology only as the tool. It's not an innocuous tool, because, as Helga says very pertinently, it changes us as much as it's changing the world around us. So the tool is a tool of our own constant self-development, but it's still a tool for us to harness the possibilities that we have. One of the things that I was struck with is how during the COVID months, we all lived digitally, you know, and all of our lives have been projected online, because we were experiencing artworks online, we're seeing virtual exhibition, virtual performances, gaming became even more important. So we were projected even more so in that sort of virtual dimension. Today we're coming out of that, and I think we need to pull back the different bits of us, you know, the virtual and the physical, and make sure we connect them back in a meaningful way. So we're not living those parallel lives. I don't know if others have experienced as I do. It was very exciting to see all these performances, all these artworks and things online, but after a while it just lose a little bit of this sheen, and you're longing to relate to what Helga was saying. You're longing for your body to be part of the experience again, to connect back. So I'm not saying that the digital will forever be gone, certainly not. But I think I'm longing for the right balance and the right way to articulate our digital and our physical selves.
Well, that's super interesting. I want to get back to you in a second about, well, also the interspecies relation. But before that, just like to give you some context about what's going on here in a particular aspect is in November, we will be opening a biennial called the Biennial of Media Art in Chile. It's edition number 15. And the title this year is Thresholds, Umbral, which is actually the title of a book written by a Chilean writer named Juan Emar. And the biennial actually reflects and explores the paradigms that are arising from the crisis and gazing from his vision that's like 100 years ago to the current times. And the questions are how to time together, what knots do we have to bring together or unknot, So I also wanted to ask you, maybe point out more precisely, well, you kind of mentioned it just now, Alice, but maybe Helga can complement. What knots or nodes, or do you think we should be connecting or attending or putting our gaze on? Because you explained it in very excellent terms in your investigation, well, both of you, but maybe even more precisely or more personally, just so that the audience can take home some particular idea of what do you think needs to happen in these times of transformation that we are assimilating still, like in our metabolism even?
Well, I think a lot of this is, so there are all different kinds of systems. My focus in a way is on time, and the other capitalist systems and so on. We can think about, and coming back now, and we all had a lot of time to reflect, and we also, in a way, are getting a bit more space. Things are accepted, or we are accepting not every working condition anymore, or the sort of job, and we start to value breaks. We start to understand the impact of sleep. So on a daily basis, you probably felt it, that you really were exhausted. So it's always the thing when I would make an experiment or with chronobiologists, the participants would need to sleep for 3 weeks properly, because on average people are so exhausted. So you can't really get data out of them that really talks about human sleep behavior. Yeah, and I think this is a bit like where we got a bit, not every one of us, depends on your situation. But I think it's a lot about gaining certain freedom, breaking out of most countries have this saying, the early bird catches the worm, and it's just like you have to get up early and then you're productive, and this is what our society values. But especially in a lot of jobs, it really doesn't matter if I've prepared my talk at 3 a.m. last night, or if I worked from 9 to 5. And I think understanding, really listening to yourself. So that's the kind of applied knot where you tie things together, and how do you work? And in which mode, what sort of work are you doing when? I think that's quite interesting, of like, when can I really concentrate, and do I actually waste this for emails or something, that are not as important, and these kind of things. And then I think it's the same, just kind of tying in technology is just one element, it's just what means it's not a material, but something we work in for certain, it just to support us in what we do. And it can support us for certain synchronization processes. It can support us for, if you think of the environment and so on, we didn't jump on a plane, also it would be super nice to be here. But on the other hand, it really, I think if you think of my curriculum, it really enriched the curriculum, because we could have people from all over the world. I think it's this cherry picking that we are in a position to do with the technologies, and not thinking we, forcing ourselves into, or yeah, it's you know, we play around, but we are also critical of what we can do with it. You know, why would you do it in VR and not just walk in the forest? And I think, and you know, and there will be reasons why the VR will be the right experiment for this. And there are limits within each of the technologies.
Absolutely. Yeah. We are in a calibration mode still, maybe, like in terms of evolution. Alice, what do you think? How do you see it?
I think for me, you know, and it's, I think we have to allow ourselves very unproductive times. And this is something that I first perhaps experienced with Uchronia, because I'm one of the few who were allowed, who had the opportunity to go into Helga's room at the Design Museum, that beautiful room. And it was extremely popular with the entire team. But you step outside of the confine of your usual environment, you submit yourself to a different pace, to a different rhythm of time. I think, you know, it's in terms of getting new ideas, of thinking differently, of creating, you know, I found obviously the exchange with someone else, the dialogue, critical, but it's also stepping out of the constant diktat of the next email and the next meeting. You know, you don't get creative in a Microsoft Teams meeting. You know, it's good for communicating. I don't think it's particularly good to come up with new thoughts. And I think, you know, for me, what I've seen in those residencies and in the way that we nurture the practice and for artists is to give that time back, which is unconstrained by a very long list of to-dos, and allowing people to pursue this idea. And so, for example, with Helga, the pursuing of Uchronia, of just giving yourself a few months to just go see where it goes, you know, and Helga already had a pretty good idea of, you know, what the plan and the idea was, but then she was given the mandate to realize it, to do it and let it be as creative and unbound as it could be. And I think then you see, and I've seen it repeatedly, that this becomes the fuel that will develop through a personal practice over many years. You know, it's that strand, and it allows you, but you've got to spend that bit of development time and be given that permission, whether you give it to yourself or you're allowed, you know, to through a project. So I think, and particularly today, as the world is restarting, the temptation will be to go, you know, go back to our old ways. And I'm trying to find ways of actually creating a new way of operating within the art world, and perhaps within the design sector, that says, you know, that gives that space for time and new ideas as we transition. We've got to imagine a different way, because, you know, the world as it is isn't working quite as well as it should be. So there's a lot to figure out.
Well, absolutely. And if we understand art as a space of liberty, it is actually a very adequate space to study and reflect around these issues, you know, and questions. And regarding art, particularly, is that I would like to read to you a question that we received from the audience, since we still have a few minutes left. And also, quisiera invitar a la audiencia a hacer más preguntas, si quisieran, aquí en el chat del Zoom. Yo encantada se las transmito a Alice y Helga. Y por mientras, I will read you the comment. It's in Spanish, but you will receive the translation. El arte es un medio que posee sus propios códigos según la época y cómo los autores de las obras interpretan la época, siempre con un espíritu crítico. Así se desarrolla el activismo en el arte. Ustedes, ¿Creen que en ese sentido el diseño puede encontrar en este espíritu crítico un inicio a la innovación social? It's open for either of you to answer.
Yeah,
Did you get the translation? Okay, good.
Sure. No, I was listening in. So I think, well, I showed a few examples, but I think there is absolutely a critical element in design, you know, that critical thinking and that desire to reimagine society and give us the tools. So it can be, you know, at the very speculative end, and it can be imagining new worlds. And Dunn and Ravy are two designers who do that incredibly well. They're based in the US now, I think, at the Parsons School, and they speculate, they imagine new environment, they create new products, and they take us on a journey to the future, so that we can inform, perhaps then look back at how we live today and inform that. But I think to some extent, the discipline of design is always concerned with looking at the world how it is and thinking, okay, how can I make it better? You know, how can I create a new product that's going to resolve the issue? So look at the interfaces that we're using. Look at Zoom, you know, that that didn't exist before, and now we found a way to design interfaces so that I am here in London, and I think Helga is here in London as well, but a little bit, you know, somewhere away, and we're having this conversation in Chile in front of an audience. You know, this is amazing, and it all is so simple, and I can show you my slides. And so, you know, so there's always, designers are always concerned with responding to the changes that we're experiencing in the world. Some are perhaps looking further ahead to speculate more and take us forward on the journey. But I think, you know, and I think obviously artists are there to challenge us, you know, and make us think about the way in which we live today. They leave us the answers, you know. It is for us to provide answers to the questions that artists ask us. Whereas I guess you could say that, you could argue that design proposes some solutions, you know, for us to address those challenges in a new way.
I agree with you. Helga?
You're probably adding on, so I have this background, so my supervisor was Anthony Dunn, so the project also started as a critical speculative design project. And in a way, when we speak of criticality, I think it was just important of, let's say, taking the system of time and this clock system, and that we all, by the age of 7, we kind of deeply embed whatever cultural temporal system you grow up with. This is what you embed. And we all have a sense of how long 5 minutes are, or an hour, you know. So it's almost like a sixth sense. But I think the idea is still of like, just because it's embedded, it's still a human-made system that we invented, and now, you know, really strict with it for the last 200 years. But still, we can break it. You know, we can really think about this in a different way. And my projects don't have, it's not about me, it's not a blueprint. This is ideal. If we do everything by our circadian rhythm, then this is the perfect society. I have no idea. It would be a nice experiment, but it might be really mad. But it is more to suggest it, testing things out, and probably just provoke different thoughts. And then someone else, that's why I frame it under Uchronia, has a completely different time system. And I almost want you all to develop your own systems, you know, but just kind of breaking with something that seems to be such a given thing.
Thank you. Those are beautiful and inspiring answers. Well, we have maybe for like 8 minutes so that we can start coming to the end of our session and the closing of it. So maybe it's a more open question that might be useful for everybody that is here with us today and that will maybe see this later on YouTube. And it has to do, it's more personal question, it has to do with your practice and the way you see it, because we're talking about the crossings, the weaving and the entanglements of diverse fields of work and disciplines, right? Like design and art, sociology, time, science, anthropology, etc. We even mentioned Valéry and Proust, so it's also, you know, humanity, philosophy, etc. So many, you know, the question comes up a lot, like, is it intradisciplinary, multidisciplinary, or trans? Like, how is it conceptually that it works, or for you, or that you like find the way of the merging of these ways of being and of investigating, of creating as well? Maybe it's none of the above. Just a reflection about, you know, the multiple layers that we navigate when we look into these issues that we've been working around today. And with that also,
so I think it's in the nature of our discipline.
No, that, and with that, maybe after you answer that, you can just close with some, you know, final message so we can start saying goodbye.
Sorry. I think it's in the nature of our discipline that you dive into all different sorts of topics. So you always, so it's not, you know, there are few people who are really into typography and, you know, there's nothing in color theory and there's nothing around it, but even their visual perception and all this comes in. But I think there was always more, you know, why are you doing this? And it started more being like, what's my role as a designer? And, you know, can I create change? What's my impact? So, you know, it's a bit like the questioning yourself, what's your role? And then finding a unique angle within a topic. And then, you know, I was reading for a year books around time and there was no, you know, but I had this, there was this openness that I could just explore and whatever, you know, it could have been fine art, like some paintings that come out of this and not much theory, you know, but there is this openness to just dive into something and then guiding yourself through conversations and with other experts and how you interpret this, you know. And I would say my work is probably interdisciplinary in that sense. So I'm weaving and working, and I really try to have these deep connections. So I'm going to chronobiological conferences as a bit like this, you know, kind of like sticking out a bit of the crowd, but also chronobiologists are, I'm inventing them for time events. So, you know, so there starts to be a fruitful conversations, different audience that would never ever meet each other. And I think that's the point. There's so much space for us to explore if we step out of, you know, just of our discipline and have all these different partners. And yeah, I'm just, you know, I'm planning a Uchronia Institute, so more a large scale institute, and weaving in, you know, under every year there would be a different theme and different collaborators. So they would be physicists, and then there would be philosophers, and then they're chronobiologists, because of the richness of time that almost tackles every discipline. So, I don't know, I think it's just for myself, and I hope for all other artists and designers, a true enrichment to almost be allowed to dive into these other worlds and then kind of open them up to other people as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's
Alice.
I'm looking forward to the Uchronia Institute. I want to join. I want to come. So for me, you know, in my practice, I've worked in the cultural sector for most of my career, and you know, I've gone from working in a museum which was the Imperial War Museum, so social history and war, to then the Design Museum, and now starting my own company and supporting emerging artists. So I haven't kept to one specialism. I absolutely enrich my experiences in my work from the different types of work that I have done. And now, as a non-executive, I sit on the advisory committee of the British Library, and it's, so I enjoy the process by which, literature and philosophy, design and art are all inhabiting this broad cultural sector. And I think it's at the intersection of all of these disciplines that come amazing ideas, and you can, often actually design appropriates a technology from a different kind of background. We'll look at some engineering piece and use it in a different part of design. I'm reminded of the angle poise lamp, and the whole breakthrough in the angle poise lamp was the arm and the mechanism. So design is very good at grasping another idea, another technology, and applying it in a different context to generate a different result. So and I think that way of thinking is one that I find hugely valuable. Ideas can emanate from different corners, and it's how you put them in a relationship, put them in contact, that you can spark a completely new idea. So I think for me, that sort of multicultural, multi-aspect is certainly the thing that I enjoy. And in my current work, I think what interests me is also breaking down barrier, and I'm specifically looking at the art world. What I find very much in the art world is a world which is under the diktat of so-called experts who dictate what you should look at and what you shouldn't look at, what is good and what is not so good. And so it reduces actually the pool of the things that you can look at. And I find it actually that today we should get rid of all these filters and allow more people to discover more types of art, because there is a huge richness. So the process by which we'll do this is a design process, is designing a new platform and designing a new way of thinking. And so I'm using, the tools of that I've learned through the various elements of my career, and that's what I find hugely exciting in terms of also that today we have the ability to do that, because we've got these different modes of experiencing the world around us. It can be physical, it can be digital, it can be at the confluences of both. So I think there's a massive opportunity, and I think today more than ever we've got the right to imagine that new future and what we do with that opportunity.
Thank you. Well, would you like to add something else, Helga, maybe, or anything else you will, just to close? Say goodbye.
Well, I think, for me, it was a real pleasure to have this conversation and to be part of this event. For just 2 hours back in Chile, and I had a wonderful visit there about 3 or 4 years ago, and I can't wait to come back. And it's always exciting to have to have these cross-disciplinary conversations, because you always learn a lot. So I certainly have, and I hope it was an enjoyable conversation for all.
Yeah,
Helga.
I also would like to thank you for the invitation. Yeah, and I hope that the Chilean Design Month, that you explore and enjoy all the other talks and the enriching installations and things that are going on. So I hope you enjoy all that. And it was also great to be with Alice on the panel, as she has been really supportive and helped to move my project alongside. So otherwise I wouldn't be here, I think. But it's really great to have a moment to share, and also it's a few years so how we developed the work, and it's really lovely to be here. Yeah, thank you.
Well, it has absolutely been a very nurturing conversation, and to spend this time together and these hours that will probably be in our minds for a while, in our reflections as well. So we wish you success and expansion in your projects, in your investigations, in your creativeness from Chile, from the Ministry of Arts and Culture. And thank you very, very much, Alice and Helga. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody. Gracias a toda la audiencia que se mantuvo conectada.